Welcome to Eye to the Skies, UFO Synopsis, here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. I'm your host, G. Andrew, and tonight my guest is Noe Torres.
On August 25th, 1974, there was an alert from radar stations along the Texas Gulf Coast, a signal from out in the Gulf, in the middle of the Gulf, about 150, 200 miles out into the Gulf. There was the sudden appearance of an object, unexplained object, that apparently dropped down out of Earth's atmosphere. It was at a very high altitude, and it was traveling very fast, over 2,500 miles per hour. And it was kind of, it seemed at first to be inbound towards the Texas coast. So 1974, as you know, we were still in a state of heightened tension with the Soviet Union. It was still the era of the Cold War, and so for an inbound object to suddenly appear out of the Earth's atmosphere and head toward land in the United States was a major item. There was an alert that was issued by the U.S. military, and in fact, aircraft were being prepped for scrambling to go out and try to intercept this object, when the object suddenly turned and headed south along the Texas coast, but no longer seemed a threat to come inbound. And it continued heading south. Now the bearing seemed to be taking it toward Brownsville, Texas. And once again, everything that I'm describing occurred on the evening of August 25th, 1974, sometime after 10 p.m. Texas time. So this object is headed now, at first seemed to be headed toward Corpus Christi, one of the largest cities in Texas, and now moving down toward another major port city in Texas, Brownsville. So even though it was staying mostly off the coast, there was still a measure of concern by the observers here in the U.S. Well, it moved very quickly at the high rate of speed that we've described, over 2,000 miles per hour, and headed past Brownsville, still staying offshore, and then made basically a 90-degree turn suddenly that took it into Mexican airspace about 40 miles south of Brownsville. So in other words, it just skirted the tip of the bottommost tip of Texas and entered into northeastern Mexico. And it continued its trajectory across northern Mexico until it came to the state of Chihuahua, several hundred miles away from where it entered off the Gulf. And while this strange object was streaking across the sky of northern Mexico, there was another radar contact that suddenly appeared as the object was being tracked by military radar all along the Texas Mexico border, several military stations all along the Texas-Mexico border. The second radar contact was a small plane that had taken off about 45 minutes earlier from El Paso International Airport, headed south to Mexico City. It was a small propeller plane like a Cessna, and it was headed along one of the normal air corridors between El Paso and Mexico City. We've spoken to pilots who have confirmed that was a normal trajectory. And it so happened that the fast-moving UFO and the small plane, the paths on the radar screens intersected just northeast of a small town in Mexico, in Chihuahua State, known as Coyame. So the two blips on the radar became one, and it was presumed by the U.S. authorities who were monitoring all this, it was presumed that the two objects had impacted because they disappeared off the radar screen after the two blips merged. Suddenly you had a downed aircraft in the Chihuahuan Desert in a rather isolated area, very isolated area. Ruben and I have been to several times, including a recent trip we made with a television production crew from the History Channel to film an episode of the UFO Hunter series called Crash and Retrieval. which has been on the air a number of times. We've gotten really good response from. So anyway, we've been out there a number of times. It's a very rugged and isolated part of northern Mexico. So the crash happened at night in the pitch darkness of the Chihuahuan Desert in an area that is very sparsely populated. There's only a few tiny little ranches scattered over this vast area of the desert out there. So anyway, this is where it happened, and it was totally dark. There's no kind of artificial illumination out there. There was no way anybody was going to go out and look for anything in the middle of the night. It was 10:30 p.m., pitch black in the desert, and the Mexican Air Force and Mexican Army decided to wait until the following day, of course, to mount a rescue effort or a recovery effort. And the local people there, since this happened between 50 and 70 miles from the nearest tiny little town, which is Coyame, about 50 miles away at the very least, population 600 people. There was nobody from that town that was going to go out there, even if they had seen anything, which had happened at such a long distance away from their town. Even if they had seen or heard something, there was nobody that was going to go out there and to these dirt roads in the desert at night looking for anything. So anyway, the crash happened, and the following morning the Mexican military went out there with a spotter plane, dispatched out of Chihuahua City, the capital of the state of Chihuahua, which is about 60, 70 miles west of Coyame. And the overflying spotter plane first located the wreckage of the small plane. There wasn't much left of it. But then the Mexican aviators received a surprise because there was another object a short distance away from where the plane had crashed. And this second object was very strange looking. It was a silver disc. It was nearly intact, and it was gleaming, sitting there on the desert floor, gleaming in the sun. And they called it in, according to the document that we have since come to light. The U.S. military and U.S. intelligence services along the Texas-Mexico border were listening in to the recovery efforts on the radio transmissions of the recovery efforts that the Mexicans had mounted, and they heard the Mexican pilot identify the second crash location of this strange object. So a dispatch was made of a team of soldiers, we think out of the army base in Ojinaga, Chihuahua, which is along the border with Texas. So this group of soldiers with trucks are sent out, we think of out of Ojinaga, and they head out on these desert roads, these narrow and very poor desert roads that exist out there, and they head on northwest out of Ojinaga, headed toward the side where the spotter plane is leading them to. So they find this, of course, the fragments of the plane itself. There's very little of it left, but they do run across the second object. And so the story goes, as the U.S. is listening from the Texas-Mexico border to their conversations over the radio, the Mexican soldiers report finding a small silver disc about 16 feet in diameter and about 6 feet tall, and it's a classic saucer-shaped, metallic silver saucer-shaped object.